A long time ago, an old man was traveling in the country. And in those days, when you were traveling, you could knock on someone's door. You could ask for a place to stay or a meal. Maybe it was no more than a blanket by a fireplace or even a place in a barn. But people were hospitable in those days, and they helped travelers. Times have changed. And this old man was traveling, and he had bought that morning a big loaf of bread, a big sausage, and a big square of cheese. That was going to be his supper. All he needed was a place to rest his weary bones. And as he walked down the road, he saw a huge house up on a hill, and he thought, aha, those people look like they have plenty of room. He walked to the door and he knocked. An old woman answered. Now her face was all pinched, and it came to a point, as if all the meanness inside her was trying to come out from that one point. She said, "What do you want?" "Well, madam, I was wondering if you could spare a place for me to sleep. By the fireplace, perhaps, or even in the barn." "Oh, no, I don't want any of your trash around here. Get off my property or I'll set the dogs on you. You understand?" The old man nodded and said, "I understand too well." And he walked out the gate and down the road. When he got to the bottom of the hill, there was a bend in the road, and as he turned it, there was a little cottage. He could hear singing coming from the cottage. And he thought, now, this sounds a lot better. And he walked up and he knocked on the door. And a boy of about 10 or 12 answered the door and said, "Grandfather, what can I do for you?" "Well, son, I was wondering, would you mind if I slept in your shed tonight?" "No, you're not going to sleep in the shed. You come into the house." And he took the old man by the hand and brought him into the cottage. There were 3 other children sitting around their mother singing. The boy said, "Mother, look, we have a guest tonight." And everyone smiled, and the children ran and sang and danced around the old man and brought him to the table. He sat down, and the woman said, "Oh, it's so nice to have you here. We don't get guests too often." She said, "We don't have much for supper. There's some oatmeal. It's a little cold now, but you're welcome to it." And the old man looked around the room. He saw that the children were clean, but their clothes had been mended over and over again. He saw that the furniture had been mended. And even though the cottage was very clean, it was obvious these people were very poor. And he said, "Oh, I've already eaten, but you can have some of my food." And out of his pack, he took out that loaf of bread, that big sausage, and that square of cheese. And he started to cut and give it to the children. And they laughed and they gobbled down the food with a smile on their faces. He handed some to the mother, and then he asked her, "How did you come to be this way?" She sighed and she said, "My husband was a wealthy farmer. We used to live on the house up on the hill. But after our last child was born, he was killed in an accident. One child got sick, then another. I couldn't handle that big farm by myself, so I sold it. I was a seamstress also, and I made clothes for the people in the farms and villages around, but soon, with all the illness, I couldn't afford to buy cloth or thread. This is where we are now. We're poor. I don't even have enough cloth to make my own children a new hat or even a scarf." The old man nodded. Soon it was time for bed, and he put his bedroll there by the fireplace, but the boy who had answered the door said, "Oh, grandfather, you can't sleep here. If you're sleeping on the floor tonight, I won't be able to sleep well. You take my bed." And the boy, he slept where the old man would have slept on the floor, and the old man slept in the boy's bed. Next morning, he woke up to the smell of tea and toast, and he had his breakfast, and she walked him to the gate. He said, "You know, I want to thank you. You are a wonderful hostess." She smiled. He says, "I have a gift for you." She said, "Oh no, we weren't nice to you because we wanted a gift." The old man smiled and said, "I know that. For if you were, you wouldn't be getting one. Here's my special gift for you. Whatever you do first today, you will do all day." He smiled and waved, and she waved back. She walked back to the house, and she thought to herself, maybe there's enough cloth to make something for one of the children, maybe just a scarf, just something. It would make her feel better. So she went to the box where she used to keep all her cloth, and she reached in and she found something and she started to pull it out. But it wasn't a scrap of cloth. It was silk. Yard after yard after yard after yard of silk. And it kept coming out of that box as if by magic. First it was yellow, then it was black, then it was orange, then it was blue, then it was red, then it was white. Yard after yard after yard after yard, and she kept pulling and pulling for an hour, for two. It came up to their knees, and then it changed to cotton, beautiful cotton, cotton of different colors, different patterns, and she pulled and she pulled and she pulled, and it came up to their waist. It filled the cottage. The children were diving off the table, diving off the chairs into the cloth. And then it turned to wool, strong, warm wool. And she kept pulling and pulling and pulling. All day long she pulled, till finally she turned to her son and said, "Go up to our neighbor, ask her for her measuring stick. I'm going to make clothes tonight." And the boy ran up to the top of the hill, to the lady with the pointy face. He knocked on the door. "What do you want?" "Oh, my mother was wondering, can she borrow your measuring stick?" "What is she going to use it for? She has no money to buy cloth." And the boy looked at her and smiled and told her the story of the old man and how he'd given this great gift to his mother. Absent-mindedly, the woman handed the measuring stick over. And as the boy left, she thought to herself, "I should have gotten that gift. I deserve it more than her." She called her servants together and told them to go get the old man and bring him back for supper. "But he's traveling in another direction," they said. "What if he doesn't want to come back?" "If he doesn't come back, you have no place to live. You have no jobs. You better bring him back." And the servants ran to find the old man. And they found him, and he said, "But I'm going in this direction." They said, "Oh, grandfather, please come back. If you don't come back, we'll have no place to live." And they fell on their knees, and the old man took pity on them. Said, "All right, I'll come back." And as they went back, they passed by the door of that cottage, just as the sun was going down, and that last piece of cloth was being pulled from that box. And now that woman could make clothes for her children, for herself. She could start selling clothes that she made to all the people in the farms and villages around, and she would never be poor again. When the old man got to the top of the hill, the woman with the pointy face was waiting. She said, "Oh, grandfather, I'm so glad you came back. I have a wonderful supper for you." And indeed, it was a wonderful supper. And then she took him to a room, and there was a big bed with a goose-down comforter, and he fell asleep, and he had a wonderful sleep. And the next morning there was breakfast. And after breakfast, he went to the library and he read. He stayed for lunch. After lunch, he took a nap. He stayed for supper. He stayed for 1, for 2, for 3 days. The old woman kept saying, "When's he going to go? I want my gift." But he was there long enough to hear her when she yelled and screamed at her servants when she didn't think he was listening. He was there long enough to watch her when she kicked the old dog. He was there long enough to see her and hear her do all the things she didn't want him to see or hear. On the morning of the 4th day, he announced that after breakfast he would be leaving, and she thought, "Finally, I can have my gift." She walked him to the gate. He said goodbye, and she said, "Well, don't I get a gift, grandfather?" He smiled ruefully, a smile that was half sly and half sad. He said, "Yes, you have a gift. Whatever you do first thing today, you'll do all day." And he walked down the road, and she ran into the house, and she started to run up to the attic because she knew what she was going to do. Up in the attic, in a little box she kept hidden, were gold coins, and she was going to start counting those coins, and they would multiply and multiply and multiply just like the cloth, and she'd be the richest woman in the world. And she ran up and she grabbed that little box hidden in the rafters, and when she pulled it, the dust on top of that box had fallen into her face, and she started to sneeze. Achoo! 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 And she sneezed, and she sneezed, and she sneezed, and she sneezed. And she sneezed till the cows stopped giving milk. She sneezed till the chickens stopped laying eggs. She sneezed till the dogs ran away. The servants ran away. The barn shook and fell down. The windows in her house rattled till they broke. And with that last sneeze, achoo! She looked around at the ruin of her house and her farm, and the lesson of her greed was not lost on her. And that's the story of the old traveler.